All right, thank you for having me today. It's not going to be my intention to bore you to death, but last time I teased you on why it's so important to have a professional real estate that understands contracts. Because Mark will tell you that there are terms and so forth in the contract that you have to abide by or you will get stung. And so it's extremely important. So I'm going to just kind of run through a little bit of the contract because both buyer and seller have obligations in the contract, and there's consequences if you get to a place where now all of a sudden you're in trouble because of those terms. So obviously when you're buying a house and you make an offer, you're going to tell them right off the bat how many days you want to have the escrow period. So you're assigning let's say 30 days to close escrow, and right as soon as the seller signs that and communicates it back to you, boom, your time frame starts on both sides. So the clock just started. So both buyer and seller have time frames. And what I like about the new, this is an updated contract by the California Association of Realtor as of June of this year. And what I like about it is the first 3 pages of it nail out all of the terms like in one location. So you don't have to like search it in unbelievable like fashion to see if they snuck something in somewhere in the contract. So it's all kind of summarized in those first 3 pages. So you have your price, your terms, and that kind of stuff all laid out. So like some of the other things like buyers need to understand that if they don't provide verification of the down payment and loan approval, they have to do so within 3 days. And if they don't, then there's consequences to that. It also, you put out the time that you're going to investigate the property. So the contract's pre-written for a lot of those things to be done within 17 days. And in recent markets where it's been more of a seller's market, they're like, you need to do all this stuff in like 7 days. So they've shortened the time frame, and buyers are like, yes, please, thank you, just pick me. Now we're getting into more of a balanced market where these terms aren't getting changed as much. But investigation of that. Now, one of the important things that the seller needs to know is that they have to deliver disclosures and all that kind of stuff within 5 days. So the buyer has to get their stuff done. The seller has to give them their property information, usually within 7 days on delivery of documents, but the escrow provisions and all that kind of stuff has to be done within 5 days. And then here's a big sticking point. This is a very common reason why escrows get delayed. If you live in a condo complex, the hardest documents to get a hold of is the HOA documents. So you have actually 3 days as a seller to order that stuff. And that's where the escrow company does that for you, because it's like they're the third party intermediary that gets that. So it's really important that they get that ordered, because it can take a number of days to actually get those documents in. So that's one of the sticking parts. One of the things that is necessary for people to understand is contingencies and the removal of those contingencies. So you get into escrow, you've got time frames that have started, buyer's doing their investigation, the lender's doing his stuff or her stuff, and then the seller, they have to deliver all the disclosures and all that kind of stuff. So that agent needs to be right on top of getting all of them. And here's the biggest thing is that if the buyer doesn't get a document, they get an additional 5 days. And that's another area that things get stuck on, is that suddenly they realize, hey, I don't have a preliminary title report. And that could have some material things that are important in that contract, in that boundaries, easements. Hey, there's that actual lien on here that we didn't even know about from back in 1987 when you didn't pay your contractor and he filed a mechanically. So that stuff comes up through preliminary title so that you're aware of it, so you can get working on it. And your title officer, your agent, everybody dives in to try to get that cleared so that you can be able to deliver a clear title to the buyer. So that's important. So one of the things that people were doing in this recent market, where they were making offers on 5 properties at a time, because they figured I need to be able to get a property, so in order for me to get one, I have to offer on everything. And so, but here's the thing is, once somebody got into escrow, you now have a contract, and people were kind of like laissez-faire about like I actually have a contract here, but one of the things in 8A1, buyer shall act diligently and in good faith to obtain the designated loans. So if they were trying to use it as a way to, like, I've got something bird in hand, and then I'm going to go after the properties I really want, and if I get it, I'm dumping this property. So one of the things that people can fight for later on, Mark will tell you in litigation, if you're not acting in good faith, that's a problem. So buyers need to understand that. There's also, with the removal of contingency, so one of the things that you have to know is that when a buyer, if they waive a loan contingency up front, which a lot of people did in this last market, that does not mean, according to the contract, if there's an appraisal contingency, removal of the loan contingency shall not be deemed removal of the appraisal. So a lot of agents, like later on, the seller's agent didn't know their contract, didn't have an appraisal waiver with that loan waiver. And so when the appraisal came in short, because things were getting bidded up 50, 60, 100 grand over asking, but the appraisal came in short. And they said, well, you've already waived your loan contingency. The contract says I have an appraisal contingency too. So that's another area that a lot of agents were inexperienced on, and that can really cost somebody embarrassment and money on that. So one of the things that that is a remedy, if you get somebody that is supposed to have done something, what do you do? So both buyer and seller have what's called a buyer to perform and a seller to perform on that. You get 2 additional days to perform that, or you can cancel it. So for a seller, you get along in the time frame, and you're supposed to have waived the loan contingency and the property contingencies, and they're not sending it over. So what do? So you can either wait it out, or what you should be doing, and what your agent should be doing, is what the hard right is, which is we need to contractually give them a buyer to perform, which gives them 48 hours to perform that, or you have the right to cancel. You can't just cancel it because you feel like it. You have to go through these steps. A buyer to perform or a seller to perform are the remedies that you have as a buyer or a seller to get the other party to do it. Back in the day when it was a total buyer's market, right? You get into contract, and then all of a sudden, like, crickets, and the seller's like, what do? I need this guy to win the contract. So sometimes you just have to do it and bite the bullet. Sometimes you're like, you know what? I don't have anybody else, no fish is biting. I'm going to work with these people. So there are times that you can not do or do that contingency removal. Or if it's a total seller's market, sellers will be all over you to waive the contingency periods. And if you don't, they've got 5 offers in the wings, and they will make you do it, or they'll bounce you. Or you get down to the end, and the seller's like, I'm not closing because I can sell this thing for 50 grand more. How do I get out of this contract? Right? And the buyer has to actually sue them to close the deal, or they first have to give that seller's notice to perform to, like, close the escrow. But some sellers, when they get that money in their eyes, are like, do I pay Mark to get me out of this, or how do I mean, they figure all kinds of crazy stuff in a really fast-moving market. So sellers get a little greedy on that too. So it happens. So one thing that's noted under that I mentioned already, it's just important, it's another common area of delay if that seller forgets to deliver a document that buys them 5 more days. So there's nothing you can do about it as a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. You have to deliver the document, and you have to wait 5 days. They could delay waiving that contingency on that. So that's important to know. The other, the right to cancel after they've delivered, and that's where, it's that stepping stone. You have to be able to deliver that buyer's notice or the seller's notice, and then you have the right to cancel. You may not exercise that right to cancel, but you need to put them on notice. And if you're not doing that, that agent is derelict in their duty in that. So here's the thing. Once those contingencies are removed, like on a sellers, when you buyer waives that, it's deemed, and this is the court of law type talk, but once those buyer contingencies are removed, it's deemed to have agreed upon that all buyer's investigations are done, even if it's not, if the buyer's agent's inexperienced and they didn't do something for their client, they can't come back and ask for another review. All the reports have been deemed reviewed and signed off. And then also they've elected to proceed with the transaction. So once they've waived it, it's obvious that they're moving forward. And then the last thing is that they have assumed all liability, responsibility, and expense of non-delivery of any reports. So if they've missed it, then that agent advises their client to waive that contingency. It's too late. Even if there's a missing document, it's too late. So that's very important, and they could lose their deposit. Up to 3% is the max deposit. You can put $1 million down, but you're only at risk of 3% of the purchase price at most. Okay, and good lawyers like Mark, if they're representing you as a buyer, you can fight for that and try to get less of what you would lose, but you might have to offset that with how much you're going to pay for that litigation. So most people they suck it up. The last one I wanted to talk to you about that most agents do not know their contract is the contingency for the sale of the property. There's a very large but unknown, I know it, and I've used it multiple times to my client benefit, both as sellers and buyers, and that is the backup offers and seller's right to require the buyer to remove the contingency. Okay, so most times if I'm representing a buyer and I'm sending an offer that's contingent upon the sale of their property, I'm marking the box that says there's no right to notify the buyer. Of course, if they're smart, they will counter me back and say, no, we're going to do that in 10 days or 14 days or whatever we can negotiate. Okay, and then that gives them, hey, at 14 days, we can now ask you to do that. But, and this is the part where they just don't know their contract, the only way they have the right to do that is if within whatever that time frame that you agree to, they have a written, signed, and executed backup offer. Okay? That's huge because I'll tell you this, if you put a contract together and you flip it off in the MLS as being pending or backup offers, most agents don't even show that property. So the chances of them actually having a written signed backup offer, and this means that there's a backup offer addendum executed that they will move to that contract immediately if they were, so they're guaranteeing that buyer that we're now working with you. Most of the time if you get into a contract and it falls out and you had other offers at the time of going into escrow, you just start calling them, hey, is your buyer still in the market? Whereas having an actual backup addendum, that buyer is guaranteed to be getting that property. So those guys never have that. And they don't know, and so they start pegging you like, hey, you got to waive that contingency. It's like, no, I don't. You don't know your contract. So that's a huge thing. The last thing that I wanted to just talk about real briefly is there ever a time where you would not deliver the buyer to perform or seller to perform? What do you guys think?
Yes.
That's a good assumption because I alluded to it earlier. It's real simple. If you're in a buyer's market, the seller's not real easy, like ready to run you out of escrow. If you're in a total seller's market, the buyer's like, hey, what do we need to get this thing closed? And so you're not necessarily going to jump on it. But if you're in the market we're in right now, it's a very balanced market. The inventory is dropping. As we speak, it's just going down, and the rest of the year it'll be low. We got to about 4,100 homes or so in all of Orange County. I just checked yesterday, and we're at 3,900 and dropping. So the number of escrows have risen a little bit because the rates popped down, but John will tell you rates have jumped back up. So it's going to be a bumpy road. But the thing is that when supply is dropping and demand is dropping at the same time, they're kind of offsetting each other. But what it does do is it makes buyers and sellers nervous. And so transactions, everything's like, come on, how do we get this thing to the finish line? And sometimes you got to do a lot to make that happen, and that's why you need an experienced agent. So Any questions regarding real estate or anything?
I think the biggest question is, how do we know the realtor is, you know, well educated? It's not like you come out of like realtor school with like a, you know, magna cum laude sort of thing. It's
Right.
like, and also, you know, the homeowner won't necessarily know, or the buyer won't necessarily know how to grill the person on contracts.
Right.
You know, is it a reputation thing? Like, how is that done?
Yeah, well, I mean, I recommend anybody to get a referral. So, because you can get somebody else's experience with that person that, you know, you've been referred to, and you're like, how was your experience? The other one is those reviews, but those can be manipulated, right? Hey, Mike's really great.
Yeah.
You know, and when you're interviewing somebody, well, how long have you been doing real estate?
Right.
How long have you been practicing? And, you know, some agents will like be like, oh, our team has a combined 50 years experience. So it's like, well, that's a new agent. Yeah, exactly. So I would say referral.
This presentation is probably the best evidence you'll ever receive of a realtor actually knowing what he or she they do. Reputation is not going to take you home. Right? So I think this is probably one of the most valuable things you're doing.
Cool.
Actually saying, hey, I actually understand the contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, please refer me.
And there's an opportunity for you, Sean, because you can contact realtors and say, hey, you want to really demonstrate to people that you know what you're doing? Let's do a short video.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm never too busy for your referrals, so thank you very much.